August 1st, 1936, 89 years ago today, there was a boxed supper going on out at Providence Church, located next to Bush High School, which was a fairly new school then. Boxed supper was so large, it was a big community event when a church had a boxed supper. It was such a big event that they had to move it next door to Bush High School 89 years ago. There was a disturbance when a rowdy fella by the name of Dan Roberts showed up drunk, and one of the few telephones in the neighborhood would have been at Bush High School. C. Frank Bentley, educational legend in Laurel County, would have been there, and he would have probably been the one to make the phone call to call in to the sheriff's department about a drunk on the scene at the box supper. Sheriff Fred Mason and Chief Deputy, his brother-in-law, Woodson Bales, responded to that scene, and upon trying to place Dan Roberts under arrest, things didn't go real well. When Sheriff Fred Mason and Woodson Bales, whose friends and family called him Woods Bales, placed Dan under arrest for drunken behavior, he stepped back and pulled a gun, and he shot Sheriff Fred Mason in the gut. Sheriff Fred, when he fell, returned fire, striking Dan Roberts twice. Chief Deputy Woods Bales also fired and struck Dan Roberts. At some point, I plan on doing a long-form video of this story because there's some really bizarre twists and turns. But I wanted to talk about this incident today on August the 1st because this is the 89th anniversary of the box supper event. Woods Bales loaded up Sheriff Mason and Dan Roberts and rushed to Pennington General Hospital. That's what it was called in 1936. About 8 years later, it became known as Marymount Hospital. They rushed into the emergency room where two mortally wounded guys were rushed in and undoubtedly taken into emergency surgery. And in 1936, it was even more of a challenge to stop internal bleeding than it is today. As August 1st slipped into midnight into August the 2nd, 1936, at around 3 o'clock in the morning, Sheriff Fred Mason succumbed to his injuries and passed away from internal hemorrhaging caused by the gunshot wound. Here at A.R. Dyke Cemetery up on the hill is a stone that says Mason, and right here at the foot of that stone is the grave of Sheriff Fred Mason, who died at 3 o'clock in the morning on August the 2nd, 1936. Gave his life and died in the line of duty. And not far from the grave of Fred Mason is the grave of his chief deputy, Robert Woodson Bales, who lived on until 1951. And the reason why Woods Bales is so close to Sheriff Mason is because Woods Bales was married to Pearl Mason Bales, who was Sheriff Fred Mason's sister. So Woods Bales and Sheriff Fred were brothers-in-law. At 4:39 p.m. that afternoon, on August the 2nd, 1936, Dan Roberts died of his wounds at Pennington General Hospital. His burial location is unknown. As an added footnote, Fred Mason's house still stands on West 1st Street, where they had his funeral. Cars lined up for blocks and blocks for the funeral procession. His wife, Claudia Mason, went on and married a Howard and lived until 1969. After Sheriff Fred was killed, on Monday morning, Laurel County Fiscal Court appointed Claudia Mason to fill out the remainder of her husband's term, making Claudia Mason the first female sheriff in Laurel County, and to my knowledge, the first and only female sheriff in Laurel County, and at that time, the third female sheriff in the state of Kentucky. I've always been really fascinated by this story and the events that happened that led up to the story. Trust me, there are a lot more things that happened that led up to August the 1st, 1936. It all started 10 years earlier in 1926 when Dan Roberts was an 19-year-old boy. He had quite a life of criminal activity leading up to 1936 and the confrontation with Sheriff Fred Mason. It's such a long, convoluted story. I've tried to plan that out for a long-form video, and it's still a work in progress. But I did want to, on today, the 89th anniversary, pay tribute to Sheriff Fred Mason and his wife, Claudia Mason, Laurel County's first female sheriff. Not exactly how she would have wanted to become the first female sheriff, but nonetheless, quite an honor was bestowed upon her by the Laurel County government after her husband's untimely death.